Hello and welcome back. I'm David and today we're going to be looking into colour. This is a great subject and is something that is very relevant to everyday life, from the brands that we interact with, TV and film, fashion, and also to the thousands of images that we see on social media every day. So what is colour theory? Colour theory is the technique of combining certain and specific colours so that they are harmonious together. In other words, so they look great. So here we have a basic colour wheel. We're going to be using this as a reference point throughout the whole of the video. So in the middle here we have our primary colours. We have red, yellow and blue. By mixing different primary colours, we then are able to produce our secondary colours: orange, green and violet. And then obviously from there we're able to produce our tertiary colours and give an array of colours throughout the colour wheel. So the core of colour theory is actually the act of arranging these colours in harmonies, and of which there are several ways to do so. So there are a range of colour harmonies, but the ones that we're going to be going into today are the top three: monochromatic, analogous and complementary harmonies. So the first one we're going to have a look at is analogous. So analogous is arranging colours that are very close together on the colour wheel. This can obviously be used around the variety of colours, but what we're going to look at is how that can be done. Okay, so starting off on analogous harmonies, we have Claude Monet. Monet is a very famous French landscape painter. I don't want to go into the history of each and every person. I think, obviously their work stands for itself. So what do we have here? Sitting very close together on the colour wheel, we have the left-hand side of the lily pads. We have the greens, which are played against some of the yellows, which gives a very sort of subtle effect. On the right-hand side, we have obviously the use of oranges, yellows, and some reds here as well. So this is almost quite monochromatic, but it is an analogous example. Coming on to Vincent Van Gogh, on the left-hand side, we have examples of the greens that are used in the grasses, which is then played with the cool hues of the blues up in the sky. This is a beautiful example, which it also gives the example of how the palette can be almost split into two, with the cool side against the warm side, which then we obviously have here with the sunflowers. Again, this is another very close example to a monochromatic, but obviously there's an overtone of yellow, which then has the subtleties of the greens in as well. So coming down to some more vibrant examples, so we have Tom Hammock on the left-hand side, which is who creates some very simplistic pieces, often sort of landscapes. Again, we have an analogous example. So using a different part of the colour wheel, Tom is using the reds that play off against the blues, the blue of the sea with the sky. And then obviously you have the purples and the pinks that just are subtly highlighted along the edge of the shoreline here, which is just fantastic. So on the right hand side here we have Milton Avery. I just love his work. I would definitely check it out if you can. Obviously we have the vibrant orange, the orange here of the floor and the chair, which is then played off against the sort of more pinky pastel-y section of the wall. His play of colour harmonies is just fantastic. I would definitely check out his work. Okay, so on to photographers for analogous harmonies. First off, we're going to start with Ernst Hass. Ernst was very much a pioneer of colour photography, based in the US in New York. He was part of what was called the New York School of Photography, there was some fantastic photographers part of that. So Saul Leiter, Richard Avedon was named to be part of it as well. Very much street photography, but you can see the use of very similar colours. So the yellows with the orange hues, you see a very sort of closely knit palette of colours within this image. There are some hints of blues, which is obviously a complementary colour, but I think for the most part their work is, for me, very much of an analogous harmony. So moving on, we have Guy Bourdin, incredible fashion photographer, work that was quite similarly closely knit to Helmut Newton, but Guy Bourdin's use of colour is just fantastic. So here again, a very similar palette with yellows and reds, very close to each other on the colour wheel, creating quite a warm and sort of vibrant feel to his work. Alex Webb is with Magnum, a wonderful documentary photographer who's travelled the world. I love this image. It's a very different side of the colour wheel, so it's a sort of cooler feel. The overall hue is sort of a blue tint, so obviously this is picked up throughout the image. It's obviously great composition to start off with, but you have the blues which are complemented against some of the reds. So here you have the sort of reds of these gentlemen in the top. You also have a sort of pastel-y pink of the building in the background. You also have very small sort of hints of it throughout the image as well. It's a great image. You just want to keep looking at it. I love it. So Saul Leiter, I couldn't be talking about colour without mentioning him. Very much part of the New York School of Photography with Ernst Hass. This is a beautiful image. Saul was known for his quite sort of abstract use of colour, a lot of reflections, but colour was very key to his work and made a huge part of the composition. So again, very similar to Ernst Hass, we have a mixture of reds and yellows, very close together on the colour wheel, creating warm, vibrant images. And again, there's hints of blue and green, which would obviously be the other side of the colour wheel. But for the most part, it's very much up in this warmer corner. So moving on, we have two current fashion photographers. Very much I look up to their work. I love what they're doing at the moment. Two British-born photographers. Jamie Hawkesworth on the left-hand side, both using quite a similar theme of colour here, using sort of very closely knit, almost sort of green tints through to sort of the orange and reds here. Very painterly feel to this image. I just love, obviously the composition is fantastic with the abstract and the shadowing detailing going on here, but it just goes to show the effects that you can create from using such similar colours. So on the right hand side, Jack Davison, a very experimental fashion photographer, very talented and working with some of the biggest magazines. So this image was taken from a project that he did out in the US, which really kick-started his career, but such a beautiful use not only of light but the subtleties of the colour. So obviously you see the yellow of the gentleman's top against the pastel green of the background. Okay, so now we're going to move on to complementary colours. So complementary colours, as we mentioned before, are directly opposite each other on the colour wheel. This is a way of creating contrast through colour. So we're going to start off here with Van Gogh and Henri Matisse, but what we can see here is obviously on the left hand side with Van Gogh's painting we have reds which are directly opposite greens. So the green here, which is the general makeup of the painting, has red right alongside it to create that contrast, to make it pop. We also have another complementary colour. So we have the oranges here. So we have the oranges within a lady's face, which is also contrasted against blues. Now blues are only very, very subtle in this, so obviously a hint here and a hint here, but it's interesting, we have two very much complementary schemes going on within this image. So on the right hand side, Matisse, very similar again, we have the oranges and the yellows against the violets and the blues. Obviously the blue very much makes up this image, but we do have elements to try and really bring out that contrast. We also have the greens, the green within the roof here of the what looks to be a church or a cathedral, but also with the reds and the oranges. So it's very clever use of colour. So here we're going to look a bit closer, and this is a self-portrait of Van Gogh. He did a number of self-portraits throughout his career, but anyway, this is really interesting. So when we look this close, we can really see how detailed the use of colour is. Obviously I'm not going to go into the names of each and every colour, I'm just using generic terms for us to understand. Anyway, so we have the oranges, which are obviously throughout his beard, throughout the most of the face, but it's also complemented here with the use of the background. And if we look really closely, we have obviously the oranges and the blues, the teals and the oranges, very, very close together. Incredibly clever use of colour. Again, there are, obviously we have the oranges, but we do have elements of red in here as well, and green. So the red, is almost opposite the green, so we have the lots of green sort of specks. So these are very closely linked together, and this is almost a bit of split complementary, where complementary colours are used, but there is a wider sort of broader spectrum on each side. But either way, an incredible use of colour. So here we have another example of Van Gogh, and this is more of a landscape, obviously. But again, it's the use of the greens against the reds and the oranges against the blues. It's just fantastic use, and this is really sort of shows us the makeup of the image in the painting, and how they were very deliberate about what they were doing. So let's make this relevant for photography. Saul Leiter and Ernst Hass once again. So complementary colours. Here we have the reds. Of this looks to be a reflection, as I mentioned before, very much a trademark for Saul Leiter. We have the reds against the green of the traffic light. It's very subtle, and obviously it's a very warm feeling about the image, but I just love the fact that he's just picked up on that green light, just to add the complementary colour to the red. Over on the right hand side, this is a beautiful image, one of Hass's most well-known images, and one that really sticks out for me. This is a great example of the blues and the oranges. It's just a fantastic example of complementary colours creating such a vibrant contrast within the image. Okay, so this is Steve McCurry. I think everyone who's a photographer knows of his work, very much a travel photographer. But again, anyway, so we have the oranges against the blues, a beautiful way of creating contrast. We also have the reds, and I don't know if it was purposeful, but obviously we have green speckles of paint within the frame here as well. So obviously a beautiful composed shot, a nice moment of this boy, but Steve was renowned for his use of colour in his work. So English photographer Martin Parr, a wonderful look at the life of Britain, but again the use of the reds against the blue, against the greens that is in the background, is very much typical of his work. He liked vibrant colours, and here we can have a look. Obviously we've got the greens outside, obviously a darkened down version. Obviously you can play with brightness here, as well as saturation for a photographer, but obviously that then plays against the reds, which are it's just a great image, very, very typical of Martin Parr. So we're going to come back to the two British boys, Jack and Jamie. I just love their work again. So once again we see Jack on the left hand side here, who's playing the green sort of teal colours in the image against, it's only subtle, but it's there, and it just shows his attention to detail here. Again, there's some sort of oranges and yellows in here, so it is a more complex theme that he's going for, but very deliberate. Once again, it's not just a random colour, it's thought through. On the right hand side, Jamie Hawkesworth, a very, very stark, beautiful image, an editorial image, fashion image here. So we've got obviously the greens that play and really allow that red to stick out. Okay, and the final one that we're going to go through is Monochromatic harmonies, and this is a Magnum photographer, Christopher Anderson, and he's an American photographer, and he uses colour fantastically. He produces a lot more vibrant images than what you're seeing here, but I just felt that the project that he did was just a really good representation of monochromatic. So this is a project he did with the birth of his son. So obviously here we see a very sort of minimal colour range, just using sort of the warmer tints here, the oranges, and very much just it almost looks black and white, with just hints of colour within it. And this is his son and his wife within the shower. This image here, just taken in his family home, a beautiful image of just his son looking out the window. I love this. Again, it looks so scaled back, and it's just another way that we can create feeling within an image. So what do we learn from this? I think one thing for me is the deliberate and conscious selection of colour from the painters. Obviously they have a blank canvas, so they're from the start selecting exactly what colours they want to use within the scene. For photographers as well, I think obviously depending on what style of photography you're doing, whether it's fashion where it's very formal and set up, or if it's documentary, it's very chaotic, but the choice of colour within the images is very interesting, and it definitely creates balance and harmony that we've talked about. I think colour adds another dimension to an image as opposed to a black and white. That's not to say it's better than, but I just think it adds another dimension or an element to the composition that we can play with. So I wanted to give you some examples that I've done myself of this. A couple of weeks ago I was able to go out for a morning with my camera, knowing that here in the UK we're actually in lockdown at the moment, so I'm not really able to go out of the home too much, but luckily I was able to go out a couple of weeks ago just before it all happened and spend a morning just taking some photographs, purposely thinking about these harmonies that we've just talked about. So let's have a quick look. So the two examples here are monochromatic examples. You see, very different, very similar hues of yellow and orange. Analogous, monochromatic, very similar. It's a very sort of similar palette of colour that we have here. Same on the right hand side, the gentleman and his dog. It's a very characterful portrait. I saw them coming down the road and noticed how minimalistic his clothing was. And I instantly thought that I wanted to take his portrait. I was able to select the background, thinking about what he was wearing. So yeah, I think it's okay. So this image, the image on the left, was a snapshot. I took it as I was walking past. I really like the fact that there's pillars on the left-hand side, which is sort of complementing the colours within the building. It's an interesting image in that the times we're in. Obviously, lockdown imminent. The shopping centre, which is the Royal Arcade, is actually closed down. So it's interesting. We have Analogous here. So we've got the yellows playing off of the reds. It's quite subtle. So the red, which is shown in his jumper, which is visible on the right-hand side. So it's quite subtle, this one, but again, I was specifically looking for the colour within the frame. So it's a very different way of seeing. So two characters again, but both, once I'd spotted them and chatted to them, I was very much thinking specifically about how I could choose the background to complement what they're wearing. On the right hand side, I like the fact that there's some yellow and green, which is in the background reflected in the window. That was purposeful, knowing that there's reds in his hat, and obviously the blues which are in his hat as well. I like the fact that he has a bit of a gingery beard like myself, which obviously complements the oranges, complement the blues. Again, very subtle. The one on the left hand side is almost monochromatic, but I thought I'd include it because it's quite funny. Guy on the left hand side says it all, doesn't it? So with these images, I wanted to not only do portraits, but I wanted to try some abstraction work. And I think sometimes this is actually easier to do because you have more control. Obviously with the portrait, you're very much relying on what the subject is wearing, the background, and where you happen to see them at the time. But when you're walking around, you have a lot more time and control. So with this one, obviously they're both monochromatic, but I wanted to just play around with some reflection and just using shapes and form, just to see what I can come up with. If you've made it this far, thank you and well done. I hope you found this useful, and I hope it's given you some inspiration and food for thought. I really loved experimenting with the use of colour in my own work, and I'm definitely going to be doing it more in the future. I hope to be including some videos of me doing this, and some behind the scenes of me working. If you've liked this video, please subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.